Hello and welcome to another episode of Mitten Backstage. Thanks so much for joining us. So, in the effort to keep this rolling and to compensate for the fact that my scheduling kind of got all shifted around with a combination of health issues and other people having to reschedule for various reasons, this week's episode features me. So I thought I would take a little time today just to talk about my background, where I've come from, and kind of introduce myself to all of y'all who might have just stumbled into this podcast through a recommendation or just by accident. So that's the focus of today. But as always, you can support my podcasting efforts by going to patreon.com/Dr. Snedeker. There you can get early access to podcast episodes, exclusive merch, and more. You can also go to DrSnedeker.com to see everything else that I'm currently up to around the internet. And like I've been mentioning, stay tuned. September 10, my birthday, is when a lot of changes and updates are going to be happening. So you can check out the updates to the Patreon, my website, updates to things I've been up to, all the fun things about updating your life as you kind of gradually keep putting out stuff. And if you dig today's episode, you can share it with people you think might enjoy this type of podcast, as well as subscribe, follow, all those things that you would do on a platform to show that you're engaged. Any of those options are very helpful to what I am currently working on. All right, let's get right into today's episode with me. Hello, it's me. It's weird doing the fade in because normally it's, there's another person here and I'm already starting a conversation. But hello. First of all, thank you for giving this episode that's just me a chance. Like I mentioned in the intro, a combination of, different health issues on my end, busy schedules, and people having to reschedule, which, it happens. I was going to have a guest today that had to reschedule, but I figured I would introduce myself to all of you out there who may only know me from, certain things. Maybe you just know me from these podcasts. Maybe you just know me from Earth Radio. Maybe you only know me from Blushing Monk. There are people who only know me for that group. Maybe you only met me at Grand Valley State and haven't thought about me in 10 years. And whatever way you found yourself here, thanks for tuning in to Mitten Backstage. Normally, I have a solo podcast that I do weekly called the Dr. Snedeker podcast, and that is a combination of improvising both on topics that I want to, riff about, kind of trying to get to a stage of stream of consciousness where ideas are just flowing and I'm, expressing them verbally or through keys, funny takes on things, stories, things about my life, all those things you can check out at the Dr. Snedeker podcast. But today, like I said, I wanted to introduce myself to all of you out there who maybe have only listened to Mitten Backstage. I know this podcast in particular, out of the three that I'm doing, seems to be getting the most traction, and I appreciate that. All three podcasts that I do, this one, Dutch Snedeker podcast, and Life is a Piano, which I kind of treat as a companion podcast to this. Mitten Backstage seems to resonate with a lot of folks, and understandably, I love talking with all sorts of people from around the Michigan music scene, singers, guitarists, bassists, drummers, producers, studio engineers, booking agents, talent buyers, people who work in all different parts of the industry. And, I enjoy these types of conversations with people, and I enjoy being able to have that dialogue that a lot of musicians are having. The ethos, I guess. I'm just trying to stumble over my words there. The ethos I don't even know if that's the right word. The theme for this podcast, you know, trying to get through my words, focuses on conversations that not only that we'd have as musicians backstage if we run into each other on a show or we're co-billing or, you know, just getting time at a festival together. This is also indicative of what a lot of musicians in the greater Midwest, the greater music community in America and internationally. These are the types of conversations that other people are having, you know, whether it's about how to properly use social media, the time investment versus the reward, like trying to figure out that balance of putting in a ton of effort to get results, because music is such an interesting field to be in. There are very few certainties, especially after last year. And, you know, people who thought they were, locked. They're like, I got in with this company. They do all these big shows. They're touring, or I got into this college. Like nothing is permanent. So that's also partly why I started these podcasts, is to have these discussions and kind of diversify myself a little bit further. But this is a long walk to get to the point of introducing myself. So let me just start with, I'm Tracy Snedeker. I am a about to be 29-year-old musician from Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's where I was born. That's where I was raised. That's where I went to high school. I went to Grand Valley State University for a bachelor's in classical music performance on keyboard, and then followed that up with a master's degree from Western Michigan University in jazz studies, with an emphasis on keyboard performance. And aside from those things, I come from a musical family, first and foremost. My dad and mom really supported all of us children being engaged in the arts, because I have a younger brother and younger sister, and they being my parents, they from my early age, they engaged us in music. They, I developed a habit that I'm sure a lot of musicians do, where you're thinking of tunes and you're just kind of drumming along and hitting on the table, the side of the car, on the all these drives. I was just on the phone with my grandpa the other day, and he had the same memory of going to the beach, and I was just drumming along to the radio at a very young age. And there's also old footage of me, old home movies of me playing with like a tiny little Yamaha keyboard that I still, hearing those sounds, I was like, that immediately took me back to that keyboard. Just this little Yamaha with some pre-programmed sounds and some other, backing tracks and grooves and all that. So I've had music in my life since I was a young kid. My dad's side of the family especially is very musical. If you look up various Snedekers around the country, you'll find, Jeffrey Snedeker, who teaches at Central Washington University, and also has, is married to a piano instructor, and my two cousins, both are, music school attendees. Thomas is in his undergrad, and Garrett recently just finished his master's on a Fulbright scholarship. He went to London to study, and finished up in the States because of the pandemic. And I have an uncle, Gregory Snedeker. Greg Snedeker lives in Massachusetts. He does a lot. I interned with him in high school because I needed to intern with someone in the field I was interested in going into, and I used that as an excuse to hang with my cousins and visit my uncle, because he's really taken to heart the idea that a musician kind of needs to be multifaceted. So, he's a cellist, he's a jazz pianist, he's a singer, he's a producer, engineer. He and runs a studio out of his house. He teaches privately and at a preparatory academy. He, you know, was a town selectsman for a while, which you'd think, how do you even get into politics? But he has a background in economics and another, politically savvy places. He works with dance companies. He has other groups that gig around, from cover bands to acoustic trios to all these different things. And my uncle in Florida, Andrew Snedeker, he is part of the Naples Philharmonic as an oboist, and is also a teacher educator in the area, and is married to a choir director, my Aunt Jeannie. So I think I mentioned the aunt that's married to Jeffrey is Marilyn. So if y'all need music teachers around the country, I know of a bunch of them. Oh, and my three cousins, sorry, in Florida, they all at least studied music. Some of them went on to pursue other degrees. But one, the youngest of those cousins in Florida, is currently an undergraduate student as a percussionist. So he's been doing a lot. He's been shedding orchestra rep and like putting out videos of Dave Weckl transcriptions on drum kit, and he's really motivated. And it reminded me of me when I was in my undergrad, being very motivated. But now that I've a little background on my family, I started playing and studying. I would say studying my instrument when I was 8 years old, and I remember it this way. Maybe my parents remember it differently, but I started initially on drums. I had one lesson. It was at Meyer Music with some dude who was probably way more relaxed for my, nerdy, energetic little brain. And I got bored with it because I didn't understand that, like, to get to a drum kit, you need to, you got to learn your rudiments and practice those. And then you start to translate them to other instruments. And but after that one lesson, it wasn't like, well, I guess you're done with music. It was just, hey, pick a different instrument. Maybe you'll find something you enjoy. And they probably already knew too that since I had that little keyboard, that piano might be something I would try. And I studied at Keyboard World with Gregory Booth. He took me through the Alfred Music Publishing series, and also taught me a lot of my first classical rep, and Baroque rep, Bach and Haydn and Mozart and all those things you learn studying classical music. And even a little bit of the, jazzier stuff. I then went on to study with Gregory Ballard, who I can't remember how many years I studied with him, but actually I don't live too far away from where his house was. But I studied with him and, got introduced to some of his personal music because he writes music, or wrote music. The ending to this story is that we did a big recital of his premiered music written on a bunch of children's stories. And it was at St. Cecilia, and, I was meeting all of his students and playing with, everyone in the studio, and it was this big event. And over the summer, he passed away from pancreatic cancer. So it was discovered late, very aggressive, nothing they could do. And I remember going to his funeral. But after that, that was around middle school, the middle of middle school. I was introduced to a new teacher, Aviram Reichert, who I tell everybody this because it's an interesting example of, like, you could cherry pick parts of the story and find reasons to either love it or hate it. Because overall, looking back, I love that Avi Reichert was my teacher. He was, bronze medalist in the Van Kleinberg competition. Very talented pianist. no ifs, ands, or buts about, is he qualified? Very much qualified. By far one of the, highest uh, performing, highest rated teachers I've had. Wasn't just, somebody who, like, I don't know, teaches at, out of their house, and it's just like, okay, yeah, they're the church lady. Like, they know up to a point, but they don't really know how to adapt or adjust. But, there's some church ladies who know how to do it. And there are a lot of great private teachers. But Avi Reichert was my teacher until 10th grade. And in that time, my technique drastically improved. I was competing more. I learned longer pieces from memory. I developed an interest in improvisation, partly because of my newfound technique. Or an enhanced technique at a young age, especially going to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp and just getting to you know, I'd learn the music I need to learn, and then, let's mess around with a fake book and see what's in it. But he taught me up until 10th grade because he took a job at Seoul University, where he still lives in South Korea. So you can look up all the work and performances and things he's done if you're curious. And then I spent 2 years without a teacher. I'll have other background too, and not just my music career, but I figured I'd do the music bit just to kind of have a succinct catalog of who I am. But in those 2 years, I, in terms of music, I still played and, lessened up on the studying portion a little bit. I was always learning things. I picked up guitar in high school. I was playing with a band back in the day with some slightly older high school students, and I'm totally blanking on the name. I can't remember it. I don't remember it. I'll have to remember it at some point. Sorry. I even posted about it the other day because there's a video of us playing Rage Against the Machine, and I was like, Systematic. That's the name of the band. At least now I'm doubting that because it sounds weird, but I feel like that's the band name. I don't know. Anyway, I played with that band as kind of a lead guitar role. For a couple years. There was the Interruptions. I remember that group because that was born out of Solon Ensemble. We had a septet that entered Solon Ensemble, and then we decided to keep hanging out and playing together as high school students. We'd go over to our drummer's house, Evan Potteray, for those of you who might know him, and we would, do everything. We'd learn new tunes. The tenor sax player in our group, Matt Quick, would bring songs. I remember, songs like Opposition. Like he'd just bring in tunes, and we'd learn them. We'd groove. We'd jam. And we had a couple gigs here and there. School functions, Dog Story Theater before it moved to downtown. A lot of different antics as high schoolers. But I also, was still involved. I went to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp up until probably junior year, I think, and then Aquinas' Jazz Camp. Some other supplementary learning things, and now we get, to Grand Valley. I initially auditioned to be a music educator because in my head, and what everyone around me was saying, like, get the ed degree, you'll have a job, have a job. And then right from the get-go, I played Beethoven and like the Maple Leaf Rag and like something else, just as 3 contrasting pieces. And they asked me on the spot, they're like, hey, it says here you want to come here for education. Like, is that something you want to do? And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm more interested as a performer, but I figured with the job, prospects, I probably didn't word it that formally, but the panel at the audition were like, "Nah, you should be a performer. Like you know what you're doing. Like be a performer." And that was the first time anyone had really said like had really cut right to the chase, like, "Hey, like you're a good performer, do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, why would I not double down on this thing that literally every friend group I've ever had has known me for?" Um and every adult that has seen me playing random gigs, playing school functions, getting featured solos, whatever it looks like. They were like, "Oh, he could play piano. Why wouldn't I lean into that?" So that's what I went to Grand Valley for. Classical performance. I studied with Giuseppe Lupus, who is so talented. He's a performer, very fluent in both classical and jazz. Pushed me to learn a lot of really difficult music that was totally outside of my comfort zone, like Stockhausen, or was it December 1963, 64? I can't remember I think the composer's name was Earl Brown. I don't know. It was a graphic score that it was inspired by a certain painting, and with that inspiration, there was this kind of improvised interpretation of a score, and I got to kind of draw a path of how I was interpreting it. And Hinastera. Yeah, what else? I didn't learn any of the convention. I didn't learn like Revolutionary Etude or Clair de Lune or Jadot, like Ravel, or there's all these classics that I heard a lot of other people learn, but I never learned them because that was never. I don't know. I never gravitated towards the expected stuff, and it probably made it more difficult to teach me. I would think, because I don't. I've always been someone who doesn't gravitate towards the the expected path, because I see the things that I want and the things that I want to work on, and that just happens to fall in line with being outside of a total sense of comfort and a total sense of normalcy. And more on that later. But Grand Valley was great. I also was involved in a few different ensembles. I studied jazz combo stuff with Mike Drost and a bunch of other people involved in that program. I spent a year with Tim Francek in the jazz ensemble. I spent a couple and a half, because I missed a semester, years with the Grand Valley New Music Ensemble, which I highly suggest you go look them up. Bill Ryan is, Dr. Bill Ryan. He's a doctor. He showed me, just in his approach and his actions, that there are a lot of routes to getting to do the things you want to do. So for him, he started a program at Grand Valley to kind of feature and champion contemporary works by living composers, which is something that still, even today, a lot of classical music institutions do not entertain because of donors. Donors like the classics, donors like Beethoven, donors like, maybe Debussy here and there, donors like the stuff that, like, I don't know if it's a means of preserving an institution or whatever the thought process is about, having that kind of voice being like, no weird new. But at Grand Valley, I was introduced to so many living composers. Bill Ryan himself is a composer, so I was introduced to his music. Very fun, engaging, groovy, like accessible, but not in a pandering way. Like it just it speaks from a point of like, hey, don't worry, this is something you'll enjoy. A lot of it's tonal, a lot of it's layers of minimalism, rhythmic pattern ideas, cool expressive moments. There's an album he put together with the Bill Band, kind of highlighting a few of his contributions. And the Bill Band is just friends of his in the contemporary music space, like all people I got to meet. Like Vicky Chow, Todd Reynolds, um, you know, uh, just all sorts of types. And you know, he was also part of the reason I got into chamber music and really enjoyed collaborating. It really showed me like, hey, I love it's not just out of necessity that I'm playing in different bands. I love playing with other people. I can do the solo thing and I don't mind doing the solo thing, but I like the kind of group dynamic because it's a shared experience of putting something together and you know going beyond the individual needs and putting a group ideal and the group effort first. That's something I enjoy. um, I also got introduced to the Strange Beautiful Music Festival in Detroit through that. I played there a few times and even played there after I left Grand Valley. There's one year I played with the DSO and members of New Music Detroit. We did a rendition of Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich. One of those pieces that just feels so good to play. It was a lot of fun. I also That was my first tour. My first tour in 2014 was through the Grand Valley New Music Ensemble. It was 10 days, and we went mainly around the American Southwest, hitting up various national parks. We perform in visitor centers, outdoor pavilions, wherever we could find space. We went to, Arches National Park, Great Sand Dune, Capitol Reef, Zion, and we also stopped at the Grand Canyon. We played there, Grand Canyon National Park. We also did performance with the Bode Piano Ensemble. I don't know if they've since reformed, but at the time they were taking a hiatus. And this was at Colorado College. Very cool concept for an ensemble where they would take, the lid off of a grand piano, and then you'd have 12 people all involved in an arrangement, and it might be pulling stringed instrument bow hairs through the strings for like a certain bowed effect on a piano, using different percussion equipment, different mallets, different preparations of the strings, playing the piano normally, muting string, all sorts of stuff. It's like the more complex version of what the piano guys do, to try and link it to some sort of example, because they do videos where it's like, look at us, we're hitting the piano like a drum, and it's like, cool. It's literally the least impressive external use of a thing. Through the New Music Ensemble, I got to meet a lot of people, see a lot of great music. It led me to eventually in 2016 going to the Bang on a Can Summer Music Festival, one of the most formative times of my life and young musician career, because it really showed me a world of musicians that not only were they all talented, they all had great skills as composers, as performers. They all had side complementary things that informed them as artists. Maybe they worked in the music business side, maybe they had another medium they expressed their artistic mindset through. Maybe they played other instruments just as well as their main instrument. But it's all, it was all people. They were old. Most of them were older than me. One person was younger than me, because at the time I was 23. So I was still the young boy, and but just to see like, oh, all these people are making it work, and they all have these weird niches. Like they all like, they're all making, a piano. One of them was like a piano duo called Hocket, where they take commissions for piano duo type stuff, whether it's two acoustic pianos or toy pianos or whatever. Um, they would pour energy into that, and then they were composers, and they would write pieces for other stuff. And oh, this person, writes in classical and jazz, or this person can improvise, within this space. But like I learned a ton of stuff there. Every day was workshops that would start at 10, and we would this takes place at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts in North Adams, Massachusetts. I suggest you go visit there. It's a great little town. It's a art museum that's also a music venue, so you can see a lot of great music, whether it's their Fresh Grass series or stuff on site. But we would start at 10 a.m. and each week was a different theme. One week it was Ghanaian drumming taught by a dude from Cal Arts. Another was Cuban music taught by these instructors from New York. Todd Reynolds taught a workshop on sound painting, which I can never remember the guy's name who started this concept, but the idea is to bridge the gap in creative experience and differences to come together into one shared moment. As a very generalized term, it's a series of commands that are, some are discipline specific, for like dancers versus people in pottery versus musicians, combined with expressive tools, easy ways to communicate. For example, like for the visual people, they can see this, but I'll describe it. If you draw a line, like let's say you take it and you draw a line, that's one of the symbols. You draw a line horizontal, and that expresses a long tone. But depending on how high or low you draw that line, that shows the register. So there's no specific pitch, it's just showing register. It's like play something up high, play something low, play something in a mid range. And then, like, I think this one that's kind of like dotting a poster board, is, I think that's pointillism. So it's, short attacks, no sense of rhythmic pulse, just a lot of kind of little dots, like a Jackson Pollock painting almost, for example. And then, there's cues to have some people come in, some people leave, some people sing a note, some people hold a note. There's all sorts of disciplines. So that was one week with sound painting. And then the final week we had John Luther Adams as a composer in residence. So he gave some talks. There were some performances of his music, lots of stuff. But I learned a bunch of cool pieces. I'll probably I'll probably talk about Banging a Can more in depth at some point on the podcast. But you can go to DutcherSnedeker.com/blog, and maybe you can even search this on Google. I have a series of publications I wrote based on videos and other things related from my time at Bangin' a Can, so you can read all about those experiences. I outline them in greater detail, in the specificities. But the schedule is basically like 10 a.m. you're doing workshops. There's rehearsal. There's lunch. There's concerts you might have to perform in. I did everything from being in an improvised jazz trio, improvising off of artwork, to more arranged, rehearsed things. And There'd be other types of seminars, workshops, things to do, rehearsals. And then there'd always be some sort of evening, whether it's a concert or maybe it's another performance or maybe it's a recital given by one of the faculty. There was always something to do. And then, the property would shut down around 10. There was an on-site bar that sometimes people would go to, but the cheapest place that stayed open the latest was uh the Legion, like an army vet bar. um which I'm blanking on, like, I think we the shorthand was the Legion, but whatever the proper term is, because I don't, literally it's the only time I've had drinks in that type of bar. But some of the locals loved it. Some of the locals were like, "Ugh, all these weird people changing my music on the jukebox and being noisy." Because with that kind of crowd, you'd hear like Bjork, Meshuggah, classical music, um, hip hop, trap music, uh, all sorts of sounds off of this little jukebox. Um, but we would drink. That was probably the most I've ever drank ever. Was at Bang a Can. It was every night until the bar closed, and even then, there was a pizza spot that would stay open till 3 that we could walk to for another drink, and some pizza. Or sometimes we'd go through the McDonald's drive-through just on foot because we were just like, let's try it. Um, so rinse and repeat that for a few weeks, and you could see how, like, it is such a time. I've yet to experience anything else like that ever. And I know I'll be involved in other projects and other things at some point in the future, but man, like, I still bring that up to people because I don't. It's hard to fathom how much work and time and energy went into it, and then to have such a rewarding experience is like that. That rarely happens. Sometimes it's like you put a lot of work and effort, and then it's just over, and you're like, well, what? I didn't have that closure. But with Banging a Can, it really felt like everything I had done at Grand Valley, up to that point. And especially coming off of a year where I was working at a high school. I had a gap year at Allendale High School, as a choir accompanist between my undergrad and master's, because I had gotten into the New England Conservatory, but it was way too expensive, and I made the decision to not go because it was way too expensive. So that whole year was kind of like, did I make the right call? Like, NEC is like one of those opportunities you don't really see it that often, and like I don't want to be like a financial burden on people around me. Like, did I make the right call? And then to get into Banging a Can after a year of playing, still good but nowhere near as crazy music, it felt like like this is definitely part of me. So Banging a Can, great experience. And that summer was such a shift because it was the first time I moved out of my parents' house late. So I was living with friends until I went to Banging a Can, and then as soon as I got out of Banging a Can, I moved to Kalamazoo and started my degree at Western Michigan University, which that was an experience in itself. I met a lot of great people. I got to do some great concerts. And I got to, study with 2 professors that really taught me a lot about not just, yes, they were jazz piano teachers. That's what they did. That's, very easy to just boil it down to like, yeah, they taught me jazz piano. Jeremy Siskin was my teacher the first year I was at Western. And, I really respect the fact that he wasn't that much older than me, but the way that, not just the way he carried himself, very professional, obviously, but he was very much that type of modern musician that you want to see, that you want to learn from, because he was, very well voiced in classical music, in jazz music, studied with Fred Hirsch, like great pedigree. But he also, he works with, a publisher to publish method books. He's building out his YouTube series, YouTube platform. He's kind of being that educator online and in person. And he's just that kind of person that thinks about ways to delight in playing piano. And that was something I had arguably lost a little bit in my masters because it's such a grind and such I was definitely feeling school fatigue, and um it was hard to focus on a lot of things, but you know learned a lot from him, and I learned a lot from Matthew Fries, very kind, caring person, uh very great player too. Didn't start, he wasn't like, oh, I started when I was 5, started piano lessons. He didn't start until, I think after high school, and, built a career from just hard work and having that natural acumen towards the piano. Um, I definitely would say that my time at Western, I learned a ton, and it was a great experience overall. Even with some of my own personal, literally having to get out of my own way in a lot of ways, which took that full 2 years to get out of my own way. Definitely. Was in my head a lot, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of uncertainties. Even as I was doing well, on paper, you would look at what it's like. Oh, he's passing all of his courses. He writes well. He's friendly. He makes his time. He makes commitments. Um, and I passed and I got the degree, but there's still a part of me that's like, could I have done more? Could I, like, there? If you can't tell, a lot of my life has been working. A lot of my life has been in practice rooms, in rehearsals, on stage, in a car, traveling somewhere, playing every type of music under the sun that might be afforded to me. That, not every type. I wasn't like, oh yeah, this week I was doing gamelan, and the next week I'm doing, a very regional, percussive, Central African countries music, like, jazz, classical, covers, um, groups that you need to stretch for time, all that sort of stuff. Um, but now I wanted to comment a little bit about my experiences in the Michigan music scene, because I know that there are, people who know me from various things, and they might not know exactly where I came from, as a performer. I would say my first time, other than being in my high school jazz combo, my first time playing around the Michigan music scene, the Grand Rapids scene, and the wider Michigan scene, outside of any school related group. I In 2013, I met Kelly Dillon, who is now Kelly Fritcher, because at the time we were taking a theory course together at Grand Valley, and she was like, "Oh, you have to meet my boyfriend, Brad Fritcher." Now they're married, and I was like, "Oh yeah, he's looking to be in a jazz group. That's great." And we weren't even like hanging out that long. We were playing together, and we were, doing some stuff at the time. He was, looking to record his record, and we recruited Ryan Wallace, who attended Grand Valley with me as a classical bassist. He's an educator and right now, and go watch the episode I did with him, Ryan Wallace. You'll enjoy it. He's an educator, a death metal bassist, a classical bassist, some jazz tossed in there. But we recruited him and drummer Christian Van Dynen that I had met through the Aquinas Jazz Camp. And we did a record at Blue Lake Studios. So it's the same studio where they do the public broadcasting. It's at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp. They have a recording space that they they can produce albums, but they also do live and studio performances there as well. So we did an album, the Blue Lake Studio Sessions, and it was a mix of arrangements of random standards with some originals. One of my contributions to the album, actually two of them, I wrote a song called Smooth Silk. I think it was silky smooth, and I'm like, okay, maybe we have to make it sound more formal. And now I'm just like, call it whatever. It's a song, as long as you get why you called it that. And Silky Smooth was a tune that I entered into the 2013 Art Prize, back when they had separate musician prizes. Now Art Prize has lumped music, dance, theater, all the time-based things into one category, so it's hard for, nobody really wins. Everyone just kind of tries to support each other, I guess, because that's how it's always been in the arts. Just like we'll just support each other, and the rising tide raises all ships, whatever that saying is. I don't know, but I entered that song, and we ended up winning, and got to produce the second album with the group Brad Fritcher plus Trois at the time. Later went on to become Brad Fritcher's Moods, but we recorded our second album, more original tunes from me, from other members in the band. Brad, I think Ryan wrote one for that album, and we recorded it at Mackinac Harvest Studios in Grand Rapids. With Michael Crittenden, and those two studio experiences were like some of my first foundational times, and especially in 2013 as well. Part of the session with Brad, I got to meet Hannah Rose Graves, and I joined her band the following year. Maybe even that year, but I think it was the following year, because the summer was also the first time I had a residency. Brad's friend Parker, his family owns the Ski Town Tavern, and when they were kind of relaunching the business, they wanted live music, and we played every Monday through the summer, indoors, outdoors, and that's how I met some of the people I still play music with. Justin Wieringa, Justin Avdek, different drummers, different horn players, and when being in Hannah Rose's group, I was in that band for 4 years. I think I left early 2018, because that was around the time Earth Radio was starting to get things rolling, and I wanted to focus all my time on that. I'm kind of jumping around timelines, but you can see the connective tissue between all of the West Michigan artists. I was in Hannah Rose's band for 4 years. Got to do some fun festivals. Did my first Cowpie Music Festival, and did some other fun gigs, fun appearances. Fun, like the local First Street party is one that I definitely remember, just because of the second line horns and the just playing with some fun folks. But that band taught me a lot about like just playing in general, more than getting me out of that classical mindset of like there's a start and an end. It's sometimes we would have to stretch a tune for like 10 minutes, and that's when everyone starts improvising, playing off each other. The band at that time was myself, Justin Wieringa, Justin Avdek, and Mario Copeland. And that, taught me a ton about like just kind of letting go and opening your ears to just playing and reacting to other musicians. Cause in a classical setting, everything's pretty rehearsed and pretty, not rigid, but there's a system in place for, it's like, this is what we're playing. And this is kind of, the goals we have as an ensemble and as individuals in the ensemble. So, through Hannah Rose, I saw a lot more of the music scene, learning about the Jammy Awards, learning about WICE, learning about, John Sinkovitz and his his efforts with local spins, and I do a lot of other things. Like if you want to umbrella put what I do, I'm a performer. I write. Both in the sense of publications, articles, album reviews, and pieces. I work with Third Coast Recording Company in Grand Haven. I work with the Blue Water Kings band as a member of their roster for weddings and other corporate gigs. I play in Earth Radio. I run the group Blushing Monk. I'm part of a trio called Normal Mode, and I perform with Mark Lavengood. And I also, producing these podcasts. I've always been that type of person that understands that a musician in the 21st century has to adapt, has to learn some new skills, has to be creative beyond the one instance, and has to navigate the music industry in a way that you're trying to be authentic to what you're doing, but you're also trying to understand how certain parts of the business are done and what that looks like. So, through Hannah Rose and Brad Fritchers, like in both of those groups, I learned a lot about how to be a player in the scene. I met a lot of people through them. I, started to do more as a performer. There's plenty of other stories I can tell too of like, late nights practicing, learning material, stressing out, having crazy deadlines and having to meet them. All the music school is like, yes, is it as grueling as other parts of life? No. It's a lot. It's a lot more than most people when they are done with work, like they go to their science class. Science can be a little time consuming. Let's use I don't know. You do your homework for a class and then you're done. And then you're like, I'm going to go party. I'm going to go play games. For me, it was like, all right, I have to sneak in practice wherever I can because I'm accompanying multiple students. I'm in, multiple groups. I'm recording. I'm doing solo rep. I'm, having to do whatever. And I could make a whole other podcast episode just about that, but I just wanted to introduce a lot of things about myself in this episode. So, cut to now. Earth Radio is currently working on our 4th studio album. We've put out 3 studio albums and 1 single, separate from all those. We started in 2017, and that was because Justin Avdek, who was the bass player with me in the Gravestones, he we had been playing together in a group of his called the Underground Circus. We had done 3 albums with that project, and now was the time to see what else we could put together. He and I were at Brad's wedding and met Hannah Lane, the singer for Earth Radio, and we were all hanging out, and he had he kind of got recruited to do more with Hannah. She was putting together a trio for her for her album Cut Your Strings, her first EP. And in that process, Justin was like, we should do something with these people. So he brought together me and Mario, and then Hannah, and we all tracked an album in 2 weeks, and that became Earth Radio, the debut album and the debut of the band. Mario has since left the band. Madison George is our current drummer, although he is also on his way to Nashville. So we have David Ward, who will be stepping in. He's been our percussionist for coming up on a year now and collaborator. And then, we've had different guitarists, different, other collaborators. Travis Swanson's been on on two of our records, and he is continuing to be a stellar musician, and he's a father now. So definitely gotta get the thing that bands don't bring in a lot of money. We don't. I haven't paid myself from the band really hardly ever. I think we've maybe a couple $100, and if it was anything larger, it was something that I'd have to pay back, obviously, and that was discussed. But it's, yeah, we don't make a lot of money. But it's a great band. It's my main focus, and it's something I put a lot of time and effort into. I did the bulk of the booking. We're trying to split the workload going forward. Or finding opportunities for us to make content, finding us times to be on the radio, the Tiny Desk submission, the Kickstarter campaign, like all these things that, yes, the entirety of the band was involved in, but I had, at least some hand in steering those things to our favor. Another band I forgot to mention from my past that cannot be understated, and hopefully he's not listening to this and being like, hey, where's my band? I played for, I think, 2 years, it was, ultimately, with the Benjamin James Band. And through that, I had known some people like Caleb Elzinga for a few years. We met at the Speakeasy Jams that Brad Fritzer's Moods used to run before it turned into Local Spins Wednesdays. Whether or not he sees it that way, that's kind of what happened. I remember that gradual shift, and it's fine. You build it and someone will come and keep it running. So that's at least a good thing. It's a fixture of the city now. But that band was so much fun to play in. All these talented MSU dudes, Benjamin James recruited, Caleb Elzinga, Evan Taylor, go follow him. He's on such a come up right now, and it's motivating to see like how a trumpet player, like he's a trumpet player, and he'd probably agree too. Like, it's like being a backup singer and having any sort of notoriety. Like trumpet players can do a lot of cool stuff, but you kind of have to have, it's a combination of things that, make someone stand out. So Evan Taylor is doing great in Miami right now. Joe Vasquez, who I'll be seeing in the next couple weeks, which is exciting. Very talented bass player, lives out in Washington now. BK, who lives in, I think, Memphis now. He was on drums, and also, he subbed in all sorts of players. Different drummers like Shaq and Shone, for those of you who know the Grand Rapids gospel scene. You can also remember someone like, I'm going to find it, one sec. I'll just cut Aaron Smith. I couldn't remember his last name. Aaron, for whatever reason. Aaron Smith, I met through the Benjamin James Band. Go follow him. He's also killing it. Walter Cano, he's in New York. He's done a lot of cool stuff and still doing a lot of cool stuff. Just all sorts of players, all sorts of people, played the Shorts Brewing, their anniversary party festival, got to open for May Earlywine and Laith Al-Sadi. So, it's cool getting those opportunities and getting to kind of elevate what you're up to. And Benjamin James also taught me a lot about being organized, and not that I apply everything, but he's very organized and driven and understands how to ebb and flow and make the changes he needs to. He's playing a lot more trombone now. there's so many people I could talk about in my journey in the scene, because it's definitely a combination of my personal work, but it's also the community that I've really, grown around and surrounded myself with. So that's part of a reason I like having Grand Rapids as a home base, because I know that I have a strong springboard to kind of launch myself into whatever I want to do. And I guess the other groups that I mentioned briefly, Blushing Monk was a group that started in 2017. Steve Hilger, this guitarist in the area, jazz guitarist, he was programming for the Grand Jazz Fest, and they have a slot for student-led groups. And at the time, I was still at Western, and he was curious if I could put together a group, and I did. It ended up being Blushing Monk. The first lineup was Brad Fritcher, Caleb Elzinga, Joe Vasquez, Olin Clark, who Olin Clark's going to be on the podcast. A lot of these folks are going to be on the podcast, or if they haven't already, and Jordan Otto. And we did a few tunes, some that Olin wrote previously, a new tune of Olin's, and then a couple of mine that I wrote previously, and we recorded it at Western Sound Studios to put together an EP, artwork by Isan, also known as Pluto Monday. We put that together as a kind of a landing point of like, hey, we're this group, we're playing the Grand Jazz Fest. The group since evolved into sort of this conceptual fluid group, as people move in and out of the state, to highlight the works of jazz artists in the region who, there's so many talented people that don't get to play their music out a lot of different spaces or in a lot of different contexts. So to have this kind of group as a vehicle for that is always cool. The most recent iterations have included, Western drummers like Ethan Bausma, Ryan Deminick, Madison George, Travis Swanson in the group, all sorts of players just adding their own kind of colors and contexts. I put out an album last year, a full length, where it was 3 new tunes recorded by Stanley Rubinoff, myself, Madison, and Caleb at La Luna Recording and Sound, and it was paired and remastered with the EP tunes, and it's out as a full album called Serendipity. So yeah, that group, is still kind of floaty. I schedule it in the gaps, but it's a passion project. Less of a priority than Earth Radio, but still, something I like having as a thing. And then Normal Mode is a newer trio. It was named within the last year. We have our first album coming out this year that we've named, or that has our name, I guess, as the band. And we, it's myself, Ian Thompson, and Nathan Coles. We were joking that it's like low fidelity beat jazz. Some version of like spacey instrumental, groove music, like Dilla-esque, jazz-esque, somewhere in those different influencing cross sections. And they're fun dudes to work with, and they put in a lot of work on their own personal things. Ian works with Cameron Blake, sometimes plays with Mark Lavengood, does other freelance gigs. Nathan works for Black Swamp Percussion, and I think he plays with Vagabonds, and like he just announced some other group where he's in a leather jacket, and I can't remember the name of it, but I think it's like a rock group. I just remember seeing the photos. Yeah, there's so much. How to introduce myself in a podcast. I think I've done a good job, though. This is a shorter episode because of it. Because there's still so much more that I want to do, and I'm sure I'll make another update of like, down the line of like, here's who I am and what I'm up to. But I appreciate you taking some time out of the day to hear who I am as a musician and what I'm currently up to. we'll just let this kind of be the outro, I guess. Let the credits roll, and if you dig what I'm up to, again, patreon.com/Dutcher Snedeker. You can support me there directly. DutcherSnedeker.com. You can view videos. You can read stuff on my blog, from music reviews to other pieces I've written as far back as 2014. So my earliest concert writings, earliest music reviews. There's a discography under the music tab where you can see all the different recordings I've been involved in that are currently published. You can, see a lot of stuff. You can follow me on my socials. Those, Facebook, Instagram are kind of the two main ones. The YouTube page, all those good things. And keep an eye out because, there's more stuff happening with Earth Radio going forward. Normal Mode's got some stuff in the, we have an album coming out. Earth Radio is about to work on our next album. There's a lot of other projects I didn't mention. You could go look up, like the Michigan Recording Collective and our cover of, a Snarky Puppy tune. You can look up old discography from the Gravestones. You can look up old Underground Circus tunes. You can look up, there's a lot. if this doesn't tell you one thing, I've done a lot of stuff, and I'm still doing more, and I'm, learning how to say no even more so I can do more of the things I like. And I will say that, take a vacation, because I haven't taken a vacation, and I'm only just now thinking about taking a vacation, because I need to recharge even from stuff that's fun. But yeah, this is the end of today's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you with a guest starting up again next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave questions in the comments. You can also directly contact me through my website. Just whatever, shoot me a DM on Instagram or Facebook, whatever is convenient for you. I check all those sources. So thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode of Mitten Backstage.